And Law 1, naturally, I think, is about the field of play. So, something that's a bit of a debate right at the start on in Scottish football at the moment is the surface itself. What surface should we use? And the law basically says that the field of play must be wholly natural, or, if competition rules permit, a wholly artificial playing surface, except where competition rules permit an integrated combination of artificial and natural materials. So that's basically saying you can have a grass pitch. We expect most pitches to be grass, but if the competition permits it, you could have Astro, or you could have hybrid.
A hybrid, yes.
Currently, the SPFL allow all three at all levels. In England, I don't think any artificial surfaces are allowed in the top 5 tiers, potentially. There were attempts to change that to allow them in, I think, the EFL at one point, but they never got through. But that in itself is basically just saying, do what you want. And it's interesting, it obviously says natural, it doesn't actually say it has to be grass, so I don't know what would happen if you... Blaze.
Is that natural? I don't know, whether it's brick, isn't it?
Yeah, it can't be natural, but it's I suppose if you were trying to play on a field of clover or something like that, maybe that would be acceptable. But the other interesting one is that the colour of artificial surfaces must be green. I think that's it's just to make it look like football, I suppose, isn't it? So you can't have a blue artificial turf, which is probably why there's not one at Ibrox.
Yes.
But it's just obviously these types of things. It's like some of these feel like there's not really a reason for them, because they're actually in practice would make no difference to the game if the pitch was blue. But I suppose it's about what it looks like and preserving an image. And then there's stuff about the quality of the if artificial surfaces are used, then if for international football they have to be meet a particular quality programme. So not very interesting to get started. Then we get on to the markings on the field of play. And the interesting thing to say is that the pitch has to be rectangular. Now, we all know that. Technically, I don't know if this is still true, but we'll see. There's a maximum and a minimum width and a maximum and a minimum sort of length of the pitch. When it says it's rectangular, in theory, a square is a rectangle, and you could just about make it a square. But it's saying obviously it's rectangular, and the lines have to be continuous. And it says the lines must not be dangerous. And you may be looking at that and thinking, what does that mean? Anyone who watched Duncan Mackay on A View from the Terrace will know that they're not always straight unless you do it properly. But I was just coincidentally reading a story about former Rangers goalkeeper Andy Dibble.
9-in-a-row hero.
Yes, so I was funnily enough, I was watching a video of Kelly winning at Ibrox in 1996-97, I think it was.
Yeah, would have been that
and
season.
Dibble was in goals, and I was like, okay, I need to, and I knew I'd heard of him. And while Andy Dibble was playing in the League of Wales, which is the predecessor of the Welsh Premier League, he was playing on a pitch and he slid on the grass and got chemical burns from the lines.
Wow.
And ended up having to sue the local council that ran that operated the venue for 20 grand for his damages. So I assume that's what it gets into when it's saying they're not dangerous. Like, make sure you paint them with something that is safe to humans, I suppose. And don't draw your lines using sand or bits of broken up brick or whatever else you can use. And the lines belong to the areas of which they are boundaries. Now that sounds like technical speak, but obviously that's quite important, because that's telling you, for example, the line on the edge of the penalty box is in the penalty box, which is important for penalty decisions.
On the line is in the box is a mantra.
And that's obviously kind of pointing that part out. And only the lines indicated in this law, which there's a picture for, are allowed to be marked on the field. Now, you sometimes see cases where that doesn't apply. If you ever watch, especially kind of games on Astro at very low levels, the pitches are often shared with like hockey or some other sport, and you do see those rogue lines. And I don't know if you've ever seen an example of someone like picking up the ball when they've been inside the wrong line or something like that. And it actually happened at Rugby Park, where there's different maximum and minimum pitch widths for European competition. So when Kelly were in Europe, very short-lived European trip a couple of years ago, we had to mark the pitch wider for European games, but then it went back to the kind of normal dimensions for the league games, and you could see the kind of faded versions of the European lines outside the pitch for a wee while. But I did actually wonder what would have happened if we'd been like in Europe for a while and having to go back and forward between the two for League and Cup. I don't know how that would have worked, whether the lines would have been faded or not. But you do sometimes see this, but they're technically not supposed to be. There's not supposed to be other lines on the pitch. In fact, it also reminds me of there was a few years ago the Scottish, like I'm talking 20 years ago, I suppose, when the Scottish Claymores were a thing, and they played at Hampden a wee bit. I'm sure there were Scottish Cup semi-finals where the markings from like the NFL or it's not NFL, but gridiron were present on the pitch, or you could still see them and stuff, but they're not meant to be there. But sometimes, again, if a referee turns up and it's either you've got some faded lines on the pitch or the game doesn't happen, then usually they're going to go for the faded lines on the pitch, and that's true of a lot of this stuff. The two longer boundary lines are touch lines, and the two shorter lines are goal lines. Okay, yeah, that's just some terminology for you. And we have to be aware that the field of play is divided into two halves. So some of this is like, it's natural stuff, but it needs to be written somewhere. And then you've got a centre circle, and the centre circle should be a radius of 9.15 metres or 10 yards. So it's a circle of radius 10 yards, and the reason for that is obviously so that players are 10 yards away from the ball when it's kicked. All the lines have to be the same width, and there's actually a maximum width of line, which is obviously important as well, because if you, in theory, could make the lines as wide as possible, then it's obviously got a huge impact on the size of the penalty area, etc. And they can't be wider than 12 centimetres. And then you've got your first piece of players getting into trouble, which is that if a player makes unauthorised marks on the pitch, they should get a yellow card. I think the most common example of this is like players digging up the pitch for penalties, I suppose. I think that's kind of where that comes under, where you've seen it before, where someone's like digging up the penalty spot while their opponent's about to wait to take a pen. I suppose that's kind of making an unauthorised mark.
We've seen recently, so Ivan Toney down south, I think he moved the referee's foam. Where a free kick to show where a free kick should be taken. Because he wanted to take it somewhere else. So that'd be another one. Yeah, that's an unauthorised marking on the pitch, because it's authorised when the referee does it. It's unauthorised when Ivan Toney does it. And then there's obviously a nice map of the of what the field of play should look like. Obviously telling you the size of the goal area. We all know that the goals are 7.32 metres wide, and we all know that the 9.15 metres of the centre circle, but fortunately they are changeable to yards as well. You can see that the goals are 8 yards wide. We've got a 1 yard radius on the centre circle, on the corner circles, and it's giving you the maximum and minimum dimensions of the pitch. So the pitch can be between 100 and 130 yards in length, and between 50 and 100 yards in width. And that 50 to 100 width is extremely wide. That's a very, very big difference, because if you had a pitch which was 50 yards wide, that's barely covering the corner flags would basically be right next to the edge of the 18-yard box on that, because the total width of the 18-yard box plus the goals is 44 yards, because you've got 18 yards either side, plus plus the goals themselves are 8, so that would give you 6 yards in total. So 3 either side between the corner flags and the in the box. So it's quite a wide range, and I assume a lot of these are obviously. I think if football as a sport was being designed entirely from scratch now, there would be a single standardised size that the pitch would be. But obviously these have been developed after clubs have built stadiums and the game's been developing, and
everyone's been using whatever sort of space they have available to them. So, and now if FIFA were to come out and say your pitch must be X size, it would have an enormous impact. And we saw this with Brecon a few years ago. I don't know if you remember the story with them.
I don't remember that.
Basically, there was a proposal that the pitch width was going to have to be increased a little bit for like SFA rules anyway, and they were going to have to lose the hedge, and there was obviously a bit of outrage about that, and I think it was rolled back a little bit, and so there's all of this is it's weird that in a game like which is so global that the size of the pitch, which is quite important to how the game plays, is so variable. The lengths are obviously less variable, but the widths are pretty variable. I don't know if there's anything else on markings on the pitch. I guess there's an option to have a 10-yard mark from the corner flag, so you can put like those wee little lines. You see them sometimes, but they're not that common. It's basically to mark how far 10 yards is from the corner, because you can't be within 10 yards of a corner taker. And you're allowed a wee flag post at the halfway line, which is a very European thing. I think you don't. A very 1970s thing as well. Yeah. But and the penalties measured from, as obviously penalty spot is 12 yards from the goal as well. Yeah, we all know this stuff. And then there's different dimensions for international ones. And these are just explaining basically the next sections, like the size of the goal area, which is the name for the 6-yard box, and how to draw them, and likewise the 18-yard box. And the fact that there's obviously the arc on the edge of the penalty box, which is one of the markings that I think sometimes people forget why it's there. Can you tell me why it's there, Ewan?
For when penalties are taken, to make sure that someone's 10 yards away.
To make sure that defenders are 10 yards away from the ball when the penalty's being kicked, because obviously it's like a circle round that. So it's the same as encroaching into the box. You're also not allowed to encroach to within 10 yards for those. And then you've got the corner arc, and there's some information here about corner flags. Corner flags are compulsory. You do need to have corner flags in order for a game of football to take place, and they must be at least 5 foot high. So those are requirements for corner flags. And obviously, I think the corner flags are part of the field of play, and we all know it's an entertaining moment of the game. If the ball hits off the corner flag and comes back in, then it's still in play. So they are, I suppose, part of the game. And then there's some information about the technical area, which is of particular interest to Richard Keys, I think, who's certainly not happy when people leave the technical area. But if stadiums, and it's funny because in law, in the first part, like kind of preamble, it talks about how the laws of the game are the same, whether it's the FIFA World Cup or like a game being played in, a public park, and it's just fundamentally not true, because you've got a whole. I mean, okay, it says if you have a stadium, but clearly you don't have technical areas when you're playing down the park. But the technical area should only be a maximum of 1 meter away from the bench, essentially, and should not be within more than 1 meter from the touchline, basically. It should be well marked, and the competition rules should say how many people are allowed in the technical area. Now, that can mean in the technical area as in coaching staff on the bench, etc., and there are also can be rules about how many people are allowed kind of away, and you can see that only one person at a time is allowed to convey tactical instructions, so you're not supposed to have 2 people out shouting. But again, you see that happen a lot of the time, and it's one that's very difficult to manage, and especially if you don't have 4th officials, but even if you do. And they are all supposed to be identified, so you are supposed to have a list on the team sheet of all the individuals who are in the technical area. And they're basically all, especially now you see like now that managers can give, or coaches can get yellow cards, they're now all listed so that the referee can essentially dish out punishment to them if they step over the line as well. They must behave in a responsible manner, which mostly they don't, and they have to stay inside it except in special circumstances, so i.e. when the referee tells them to, or if they're a physio, obviously, to come on and check a player.
or I suppose if they like need the toilet or something, which is not mentioned but should be assumed. And then some information about the goals themselves, and you can see why folk probably switch on this website and then go, I'm fed up of this, because a lot of it is like really straightforward stuff that just needs to be governed. But the goals have to be in the middle of the goal line, and they're two posts joined at the top by a horizontal crossbar. And of course, like traditionally old school football, it was a bit of tape that used to be there rather than a crossbar. That was I think perhaps even an early 20th century invention, the crossbar. It never used to be there. But I think...
So one of the things that Hibs claim credit for?
Oh, they probably invented the crossbar along with everything else.
Yeah.
And they must be made of approved material. And I really enjoy it when it says stuff like this, because it's like, well, what does that mean? Approved by who and why? Because it doesn't tell you. And they must be the same shape. So both crossbars, like both ends, have to be the same kind. But it's saying here that they can be square. Thinking back to 1978 World Cup final, isn't it? When that was in the last minute, the Argentina v the Netherlands, and I think it's Rensenbrink maybe for the Netherlands has a shot that rebounds off the square posts that are being used for the World Cup final, and probably if those posts are round, then probably Holland win the World Cup. So square posts are still allowed, but you very rarely see them at top level football now. So they can be square, they can be rectangular, they can be elliptical, or they can be a hybrid of those options, but they're pretty much always round now. You rarely see goalposts that aren't round. And they've got the height of the crossbar is, and it's nice in yards and feet to remember, because it's 8 yards wide and 8 feet tall, which is easier than thinking about it in meters. And the size of the goalpost basically hasn't changed in a very long time, and that's despite obviously goalkeepers generally getting bigger. But I think it doesn't really matter, because when you see a goalkeeper standing in the goals, there's still a lot of space round about them. And clearly, if the crossbar is broken, and I'm thinking of 1994 World Cup, Mexico v Bulgaria, I think, then play has to continue. The play has to be stopped until they fix it. That should not be surprising, that we are not expecting to play games of football with half a crossbar. If it can't be repaired, the game has to be abandoned. You can't use a rope to replace the crossbar. Thank you for that one, IFAB. There must be nets attached to the goals, and they must be properly supported and must not interfere with the goalkeeper. And if they're portable goals, they must be fixed to the ground. Nets are obviously an interesting one, because you always still see assistants going to check the nets before the game, and they're obviously basically checking that they're secured to the ground, because if they're not secured to the ground properly, then you can have the situation where the ball goes through them, which can either be a ball coming from outside the net going through into the net and appearing like a goal, or a ball being a goal but going through the net and therefore appearing not to be. Neither of which we want to be happening at any level, but particularly not at professional level. There have been examples of it, but not recently, because I think there's obviously been much more stringently checked of late. And then we've got, in amongst all of that, goal line technology, which seems like a bit a bit different to all of the rest, but I suppose it's a piece of equipment on the field of play, and they can be used. They're obviously not, goal line technology is not used in the SPFL at any level. It is used, obviously, I think it's used in England still, it's used in the Champions League, etc. For Scotland, goal line decisions can still be checked with VAR in the Premiership, but goal line technology is not there, mainly because it's expensive. And the competition rules have to say it, but the principle is basically it only applies to the goal line, and it must be immediately confirmed within a second to the referee. So that's basically setting aside the conditions that if someone wants to develop a goal line technology system for their league, that's how it has to work. Has to make sure it gives a decision within a second. And you usually see it's coming to the referee's watch, so the referee will get the kind of buzz on his watch, and then, or his or her watch, and we'll know that, or their watch, and they'll know that that's a goal. And it can also be sent to the video operation room, which is like VR related, obviously. if goal line technology is being used, then they have to check it works, basically. Now, that should not be a surprise. And it has to be tested, I think, before every game. And if it doesn't work, then they don't use it. Then there's stuff about advertising. So you're really going from the mundane to like the very modern football stuff. But advertising is not allowed on the pitch, full stop. Which includes the entirety of the pitch, the area inside the goal, and the nets. The technical area aren't allowed to have advertising, and the VAR area isn't allowed to have advertising. Obviously, the rest of the pitch can. And it's interesting that it now says from the time the teams enter the field of play until they've left it at half time, because obviously you've now got boards that can be switched on and off, and you've actually got stuff that can be projected. And any advertising hoardings have to be at least a metre from the touchline. And my experience, the only negative experience I ever had of advertising hoardings, I went to Belgium v Scotland in 2012, I want to say, the game where we got beat 2-0. And I was in one of the front rows in the King Baudouin Stadium in Brussels. I could not see the goal line because of advertising hoardings behind the goals. So Belgium were laying siege to Scotland's goal, and Alan McGregor was in goals for Scotland and was having a fantastic game. But the amount of times that the ball would scramble about in the box and a Belgian player would like drive a shot low towards the goal, and I'd pretty much always be like, nah, this one's going in. And then I just wouldn't be able to tell, and I'd just see like Alan McGregor standing back up for the ball, and that was my only way of knowing. So there is like obviously a value in having some legislation around that. Then we're getting on to logos. You have to not put logos on the pitch, just the same as you don't put advertising on the pitch, and that can include the FIFA logo or club badges or anything like that. But you can put them on the corner flags, and that's very useful because we know that a club badge on a corner flag signifier is the image for when you've sacked a manager or have some other club statement to make.
Did we see that Hibs tweeted out an image with Aberdeen's corner flag on it?
Yes, yeah, that was very non-standard. I think IFAB should be having a word, actually.
They should.
And then we're on to VAR, and this is obviously, there is actually VAR's not within the 17 laws of the game directly, but there's then a section related to it, which we'll talk about in more detail, or in a lot of detail, no doubt, at the end of this whole thing. But this is more about the positioning and the kind of the technical aspects of where it should be. But it's saying that if the VAR has been used for a match, there has to be a video operation room. So where's the video operation room in Scotland, Ewan?
You've been there. It's in Glasgow, isn't it?
It's an industrial estate in the east end of Glasgow, pretty much. Sometimes the video operation room will be in the stadium, and that was a option that was explored by the SFA for our VAR, but mostly in I think for FIFA competitions, they're also off-site. In England, they're off-site, but they could in theory be on-site. And there has to be a referee review area, and the referee review area is the small area at the side of the pitch where the camera, where the TV is, basically. The referee goes over to have a look.
And that got destroyed in the St Mirren Celtic game recently when Furuhashi knocked, is it Kalbakis, I think he knocked into, and it looked like the TV had smashed. I don't know if it did, but it fallen off its plinth thing anyway.
That would be a novel way for VAR to no longer be able to be used.
Yes.
We can't, because the ref can't watch the screen. You can imagine the situation. I'm sure I saw this before in, I want to say, Portugal, where something malfunctioned and the fourth official or someone was having to stand with a tablet to show the referee the decision. And it just it's the sort of thing you expect to happen in Scotland at some point. So that video operation room will have at least 3 people in it, which is the VAR themselves, the main referee, the assistant VAR will likely be in there, and a replay operator. So the replay operator is basically a person who they're not an official at all. They're just running the tape, essentially, stopping and starting and being able to, basically a person who knows how the rewind, pause and play button works, in my understanding. And yeah, maybe in the stadium or at a more distant location, and only authorised people are allowed in. Obviously, players can't go in there. So as if it's in the stadium, clearly players and substituted players are not going to be driving to the east end of Glasgow during the game to barge into the SFA's version, but obviously if they were in the stadium, the players aren't allowed to kind of access it to remonstrate. And then the referee area has to be in a visible location outside the field of play, so no cameras and no televisions in the centre circle, please.
Yep.
And has to be clearly marked. And if an official or a player enters that area, they're meant to get a yellow card for doing so.
You don't actually should have been booked for getting smashing into the TV the other week.
Yeah, well, that's it's like a grey area, right? It's like you didn't do it on purpose. But yeah, and so that's the end of the first law of the game, and well, I might as well, because these are the FAQs, right? That are set up for each section, and it's asking you some questions about the laws. So we can run a wee quiz for you, Ewan, now on what we've talked about. So the crossbar becomes broken during the match. What is the correct decision?
I have to stop play until you fix it.
That is correct. And what if it can't be fixed?
Then the match has to be abandoned.
Yeah, there we go. You're learning. I say you're learning. You probably already would have guessed that. Question number 2. A substitute enters the video operation room during a match. The referee is informed about this decision when play next stops. What is the correct procedure?
The player should be punished in some way, which would either be just a yellow, or would it be a red?
It's a red card for entering the video operation room. I don't think I said that when we were summarising, but
it feels like it should be a red. So I'm happy with that.
Certainly in Scottish football, I think if you're going to that kind of length, that's definitely a red. But
you maybe make it if you're at Parkhead, but if you're like at Pittodrie, then it'd be quite impressive to get there.
I think there would be other sanctions potentially in place from Police Scotland at that point, or the Road Transport Police. A coach enters the referee review area when the referee undertakes an on-field review. What is the correct procedure?
That would be a yellow card.
Yes, that's correct. And finally, may the referee penalise a substitute who demands using VAR? And if so, what is the sanction?
My gut feeling would be it'd be pretty much the same as asking for a yellow card. You know, the classic sort of mimed yellow card, and then you're meant to get booked for that. So I imagine if a substitute was given it the mimed TV signal, then I would probably say potentially that would be dissent and a yellow card.
Yep. I don't really think that has a place in those questions, because we've not talked about any of that stuff in these rules, but nonetheless, you thought on your feet well and got it right. So that brings us to the end of Law 1, and join us again next time or in the same episode, depending on how this is edited, for Law 2.